The old house stood at the edge of Willow Creek, its weathered clapboard siding and sagging porch a testament to its 150 years of existence. I'd inherited it from my great-aunt Margaret, a woman whose stubborn streak was as legendary as the house itself. The place was a relic, with creaking floorboards, leaded glass windows that rattled in the wind, and a sprawling oak tree in the front yard that had seen more history than most people ever would. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine, free and clear, no mortgage, no liens, and most importantly, no homeowners association, or so I thought. My name is Clara Hensley, and I'd moved to Willow Creek to escape the noise of the city, to find some quiet in the countryside where I could write my novel in peace. The house, with its quirks and its history, felt like the perfect place to start over. I'd been there barely a month, unpacking boxes and dodging cobwebs, when the first letter arrived. It was crisp, official, and stamped with the seal of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. The letterhead was embossed with a pretentious crest, a lion holding a gavel of all things, and the text was written in a tone that oozed self-righteous authority. "Dear Ms. Hensley," it began, "it has come to our attention that your property at 47 Maple Lane is in violation of several HOA covenants, including but not limited to unapproved exterior paint color, non-compliant landscaping, and failure to submit to mandatory architectural review. You are hereby required to rectify these violations within 30 days or face fines and potential legal action." I read it twice, my coffee going cold on the kitchen table. HOA? I wasn't part of any HOA. Aunt Margaret's house had been built in 1873, long before the cookie-cutter subdivisions and their petty bureaucracies had crept into Willow Creek. The deed was clear: no covenants, no restrictions, no associations. I tossed the letter in a drawer, figuring it was a mistake, and went back to sanding the banister. But the letters kept coming. Every few days, another one would show up, each more insistent than the last. They cited violations I'd never heard of. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black. My fence was 2 inches too tall. My oak tree's branches extended too far over the property line. The fines started small, $50 here, $100 there, but they quickly escalated. By the third letter, they were threatening a lien on my property if I didn't comply. I called the number listed at the bottom, expecting a quick resolution, but the woman on the other end, Karen something or other, the HOA president, spoke to me like I was a delinquent tenant. "Ms. Hensley, ignorance of the covenants is no excuse," she said, her voice sharp as a paper cut. "Your property is within Willow Creek's jurisdiction, and you will comply." "I'm not part of your HOA," I said, gripping the phone. "My deed predates your entire neighborhood." There was a pause, then a condescending chuckle. "That's what they all say. We'll see you at the compliance hearing." I hung up, my stomach churning. This wasn't just a clerical error. This was a power grab, and I wasn't about to let some clipboard-wielding busybodies bully me out of my home. I dug through Aunt Margaret's old files, looking for anything that might explain why the HOA thought they had claim to my property. The deed was clean, but I found a yellowed map from the 1970s showing the original boundaries of Willow Creek. My house sat just outside the subdivision's limits, a lone holdout surrounded by newer homes. Somehow, the HOA had decided to redraw the lines. I drove to the county recorder's office the next day, armed with the deed and the map. The clerk, a tired-looking man named Harold, confirmed what I suspected. My property wasn't part of the HOA's jurisdiction. He pulled up the subdivision's plat map, pointing out the clear boundary line that excluded 47 Maple Lane. "They've got no legal standing," he said, scratching his head, "but HOAs can be persistent." Persistent was an understatement. The next week, I came home to find a notice taped to my front door. A summons to an HOA compliance hearing at the community center. The letter claimed I owed $2,500 in fines and that failure to attend would result in further action. I tore it down, my hands shaking with anger. This wasn't just about paint colors or tree branches. They were trying to strong-arm me into submission, and I had a sinking feeling it wasn't just about aesthetics. I decided to attend the hearing, if only to set the record straight. The community center was a sterile, fluorescent-lit building that smelled of cheap coffee and bureaucracy. The HOA board sat at a long table, 5 of them in pressed khakis and polo shirts, looking like they'd been cast from the same mold. Karen, the president, was at the center, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She introduced herself with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and launched into a lecture about community standards and property values. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, clutching my deed. "I'm not part of your HOA," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My property isn't in your subdivision, and your covenants don't apply to me." Karen's smile tightened. "Ms. Hensley, our records show that 47 Maple Lane was annexed into the Willow Creek HOA in 1998. Your aunt signed the agreement." "That's impossible," I said. "Aunt Margaret would never have agreed to that. She hated HOAs." The board exchanged glances, and Karen slid a document across the table. It was a single page, dated 1998, with what looked like Aunt Margaret's signature at the bottom. My heart sank. The signature was shaky, not unlike her handwriting in her later years, but something about it felt off. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd seen enough of her letters to know her flourish, the way she looped her M and crossed her T. This didn't look right. "I'd like a copy of this," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Of course," Karen said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "But you'll need to pay the copying fee. And the fines, of course." I left the hearing with a copy of the document and a growing sense of unease. That night, I pored over the paper under the dim light of my kitchen lamp. The signature was close, but not perfect. And the date, 1998, was when Aunt Margaret had been in and out of the hospital, barely able to sign her own checks. There was no way she'd signed over her property to an HOA she despised. I called a friend, Lila, who worked as a paralegal, and sent her a scan of the document. Her response came the next morning. "Clara, this looks forged. You need a lawyer." I didn't have the money for a lawyer, not really. My savings were tied up in fixing the house's leaky roof and ancient plumbing, but I wasn't about to let this go. I started digging, pulling every record I could find on the HOA. Online forums were filled with horror stories about Willow Creek, fines for minor infractions, liens on homes, even foreclosures over unpaid dues. One post mentioned a man named Tom Whitaker, a former board member who'd quit after a disagreement with Karen. I tracked him down through a mutual acquaintance and met him at a diner on the edge of town. Tom was in his 60s with a weathered face and a distrustful squint. "Karen's been running that HOA like her personal fiefdom for years," he said, stirring his coffee. "She's got the board wrapped around her finger, and they've been expanding their reach, claiming properties that aren't even in the subdivision. Your aunt's house? They've been after it for years. It's prime real estate, big lot, historic charm. They want to flip it to a developer." "But why?" I asked. "They can't just take it." Tom leaned in, lowering his voice. "They can if they bury you in fines and legal fees until you give up. That annexation document. I'd bet my truck it's fake. Karen's got connections at the county, someone who'll file whatever she wants." I drove home that night, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a few fines. This was a calculated attempt to steal my home, and I was standing in the way of someone's payday. I didn't know how deep this went, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them win. The next morning, I woke up to a new notice on my door. A lien had been placed on my property for $5,000 in unpaid fines. My hands shook as I read it. A lien meant they could force a sale if I didn't pay, and I didn't have $5,000 lying around. I called Lila again, and she agreed to help me file a response with the county, but she warned me it would only buy time. "You need evidence," she said. "Proof that document is forged or that your property was never part of their jurisdiction." I started with the county records. Harold, the clerk, was sympathetic but cautious. "I can't accuse anyone of forgery without proof," he said, handing me a stack of microfilm records. "But you can look through these. Anything filed on your property will be in there." I spent days at the recorder's office, my eyes burning from the flickering microfilm reader. Most of the records were mundane, tax assessments, utility easements, but one entry caught my eye, a 1998 filing that amended the Willow Creek HOA's boundaries to include 47 Maple Lane. The document referenced Aunt Margaret's supposed agreement, but the notary's name was smudged, and the filing number didn't match the county's usual format. I requested a copy and sent it to Lila, who confirmed it was suspicious. "The notary's license number is invalid," she said. "This is sloppy work, Clara. You're onto something." I also tracked down the notary listed on the document, a woman named Evelyn Porter. She'd retired years ago and lived in a small apartment on the other side of town. When I showed her the document, her face paled. "I never notarized this," she said, shaking her head. "I was out of state in '98 caring for my mother. Someone used my name." Evelyn's testimony was a start, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. I started attending HOA meetings, sitting in the back and taking notes. The board was a clique of self-important types, all nodding along to Karen's every word. They discussed expansion plans and property acquisition with a casualness that made my skin crawl. At one meeting, I overheard Karen mention a developer named Meridian Properties, a company that had been buying up land around Willow Creek. I jotted down the name and started researching. Meridian Properties was a shadowy outfit with a bare-bones website and no clear leadership listed, but a deep dive into public records revealed that Karen's husband, Greg, was a silent partner in the company. The pieces were starting to fit together. The HOA was a front, a way to pressure homeowners into selling cheap or losing their properties to liens. My house, with its large lot and historic status, was a goldmine for a developer looking to build condos or a strip mall. I needed an ally, someone who could help me fight this legally. I reached out to a local lawyer, Daniel Pierce, who took my case pro bono after hearing my story. "This is fraud," he said, reviewing the documents, "but we need to prove intent. If we can show Karen or the HOA fabricated that annexation, we can sue for damages and get the lien lifted." Daniel filed a motion to challenge the lien, citing the invalid notary and the questionable boundary amendment. The HOA responded with a countersuit, claiming I was defaming their organization by questioning their authority. The legal fees started piling up, even with Daniel's help, and I was burning through my savings, but I wasn't backing down. I also started talking to my neighbors, hoping to find others who'd been targeted. Most were too scared to speak out, but one woman, Mrs. Delgado, told me her story. She'd owned a small bungalow on the edge of the subdivision and had been hit with fines until she sold to Meridian Properties for pennies on the dollar. "They made my life hell," she said, tears in her eyes. "I didn't have the strength to fight." Mrs. Delgado's story fueled my resolve. I began posting on community forums, anonymously at first, sharing what I'd learned about the HOA and Meridian. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people came forward with similar stories, some from Willow Creek, others from nearby towns. The HOA wasn't just a local nuisance, it was part of a larger scheme, preying on vulnerable homeowners. But the more I pushed, the dirtier the HOA played. One night, I came home to find my oak tree's branches hacked off, the cuts sloppy and deliberate. A week later, my mailbox was smashed. I reported both incidents to the police, but they brushed it off as vandalism, saying there was no proof it was the HOA. I knew better. This was intimidation, pure and simple. Daniel suggested we request a forensic document examiner to analyze the 1998 agreement. It was a long shot, but if we could prove the signature was forged, we'd have a smoking gun. The examiner's report came back after 2 agonizing weeks. The signature was indeed a forgery, likely traced from one of Aunt Margaret's old letters. Armed with this, Daniel filed for an injunction to halt the HOA's actions against my property. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch, staring at the old oak tree, its mutilated branches a reminder of what I was up against. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about standing up to a system that thrived on intimidation and greed. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for Aunt Margaret, for Mrs. Delgado, for everyone who'd been bullied into silence. The courtroom was small and stuffy, packed with HOA members and a few curious neighbors. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her face a mask of calm confidence. She'd hired a slick lawyer from the city, a man who spoke in circles and waved around documents like they were holy relics. Daniel, on the other hand, was methodical, laying out our case with precision: the forged signature, the invalid notary, the questionable boundary amendment, and the pattern of harassment against other homeowners. The forensic examiner's testimony was damning. She pointed out inconsistencies in the ink, the pressure of the pen, and the alignment of the signature, clear signs of tracing. Evelyn Porter took the stand, confirming she hadn't notarized the document. And I testified about the harassment, the vandalism, and the HOA's relentless pressure. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Harper, listened intently, her pen scratching notes. Karen's lawyer tried to spin it, claiming the HOA had acted in good faith based on historical records and that I was a troublemaker trying to dodge legitimate fines. But Judge Harper wasn't buying it. She ordered the lien lifted and the 1998 annexation declared null and void. "This court will not tolerate fraud," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "Ms. Hensley's property is not and never was part of the Willow Creek HOA. The room erupted in whispers, and Karen's face went white. But it wasn't over. Daniel had filed a countersuit for damages, citing emotional distress, legal fees, and the vandalism to my property. We didn't have hard proof tying the HOA to the oak tree or the mailbox, but the pattern was clear, and the judge allowed the suit to move forward. The fallout was swift. My anonymous forum posts had caught the attention of a local journalist who published a scathing exposé on the HOA and Meridian Properties. The article detailed Karen's connection to the developer, the forged documents, and the stories of other homeowners. Protests erupted outside the community center, with signs reading, "Down with the HOA" and "Stop stealing our homes." The State Attorney General's office launched an investigation, and Karen resigned as HOA president, citing personal reasons. But I wasn't done. With Daniel's help, I organized a class action lawsuit, bringing together Mrs. Delgado and dozens of others who'd been coerced into selling or paying exorbitant fines. The lawsuit targeted not just the HOA, but Meridian Properties, demanding restitution for every homeowner they'd wronged. It was a long shot, but the momentum was on our side. Months later, I stood on my porch, watching the oak tree's new growth. It was scarred, but it was healing, just like me. The house was still mine, its creaky floors and rattling windows a reminder of what I'd fought for. The lawsuit was ongoing, but the HOA was crumbling, its power stripped away by the truth. Karen had left town, and Meridian Properties was under scrutiny, its shady dealings exposed. I'd learned something through all of this. Power only works if you let it. The HOA had relied on fear, on people's willingness to comply rather than fight. But I wasn't that person. Aunt Margaret hadn't been either. And as I sat down to write again, the words finally flowing, I knew I'd done more than save my home. I'd shown that even a 150-year-old house with its cracks and its history could stand strong against those who tried to tear it down. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.